My name is Alara Vance, and last night, everything I thought I knew about family shattered with the sound of my father's voice. He didn't just tell me to leave. He screamed it so loudly that the family portrait behind him cracked down the middle, splitting our faces apart like some cruel symbol. But what hurt more than his rage was the silence that followed. My stepmother stood there with her arms crossed. My brother smirked like he'd been waiting for this moment, and even my aunt, who once braided my hair before school, kept her eyes glued to the floor. One by one, they turned their backs, quietly agreeing that I no longer belonged. They thought they were exiling a burden. They had no idea they were pushing me toward the one thing my grandmother left behind that they could never steal. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me harder than their betrayal. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, numb, like someone had scooped out everything inside me. My father said I was ungrateful, difficult, a leech, words I had heard in smaller doses over the years but never all at once. All because I refused to sign a stack of papers he shoved at me during dinner. Papers he said were to finalize Grandma's estate. Papers I wanted a lawyer to see. That single request turned a tense dinner into a war. I drove away without knowing where to go. The house I rented was barely bigger than my car. My savings were thin. My job paid enough to survive, not enough to rebuild a life. But then, as I sat alone in a dark parking lot, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single text. For words, don't sign anything. Fraud. My breath caught. Fraud. My hands shook as another message arrived. A set of coordinates. A place. A clue. And suddenly, everything inside me shifted. I remembered my grandmother's voice, soft but sharp. When the wolves show their teeth, my dear, you must become the hunter. I followed the coordinates on instinct, driving for hours. Just before sunrise, I arrived at a small brick building with a single light glowing inside. A man stepped out, Mr. Sterling, my grandmother's lawyer. He'd been waiting for me, and in that quiet office, over lukewarm coffee and trembling hands, he told me the truth. My grandmother, Astrid Vance, had known my father better than anyone. She knew his greed, his carelessness, his desperation for control. So she locked everything she owned, every investment, every property, every account, behind legal protections. And she left it all to me. Not Roland. Not Daphne. Not Jax. Me. Including a $20 million cliffside mansion called Seacliff Oasis. So while my family slept comfortably after throwing me out like trash, I spent the morning signing the deed to a life they never believed I deserved. They yelled, "Get out," like it was the end. They had no idea it was the beginning. I walked into my father Roland's house expecting a normal family dinner. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the coldness in the air. Daphne, my stepmother, greeted me with a sugary smile that didn't feel real. Jax, my brother, barely lifted his eyes from his phone. When he finally looked at me, it was with boredom and irritation. My Aunt Celeste, who once raised me like her own child, couldn't even look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor as if the tiles had more to say than she did. We sat down at the table, and the dinner started, but it didn't feel like a family moment. Every question they asked me had a hidden insult behind it. Daphne made comments about my job that sounded more like mockery. My father cut down every achievement I mentioned, calling it not enough or nothing impressive. But when it came to Jax's latest random idea, a silly venture he had dreamed up a few days ago, they acted like he was some genius about to change the world. I kept my face calm, but inside, each comment stung. It felt like I was sitting in front of strangers wearing the faces of people I once trusted. Celeste stayed silent the whole time, barely eating, still avoiding my eyes. Something was terribly wrong, and I could feel it growing heavier with every passing minute. Then everything shifted. My father suddenly pulled out a thick stack of papers from under his chair and dropped them on the table with a loud thud. The sound echoed through the silent room, and I flinched. He pushed the papers toward me and told me to sign them. He said they were to finalize my grandmother's estate, but his tone wasn't gentle. It wasn't even firm. It was commanding, like he expected me to obey without question. I picked up the documents and began flipping through them. Nothing about them felt clear. The wording was strange, and important details were vague. My instincts screamed at me to slow down. So I looked up and told him calmly that I wanted my lawyer to review them before I signed anything. The moment I said those words, my father's face twisted with anger. It was like I had insulted him simply by protecting myself. He slammed his hand on the table so hard that the plates shook. Suddenly he was shouting, calling me ungrateful, dramatic, and impossible. Daphne jumped in, agreeing with everything he said. Jax rolled his eyes like I was ruining his evening. Celeste still didn't speak, but her expression showed she knew this explosion was coming. My father didn't listen to a single word I tried to say. His voice just got louder and louder, filling the room with rage. In that moment, as I sat there surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I finally understood the purpose of this dinner. It wasn't about family. It wasn't about food. It was a trap, and I was the only one who didn't know. I stepped out of the house after he yelled, "Get out!" And for a moment, I couldn't even feel my own legs. I walked down the driveway like I was moving through thick air. Everything inside me felt broken. My father's voice was still ringing in my ears, sharp and cruel. The door slammed behind me, and no one came after me. Not my stepmother, not my brother, not even Celeste. I was completely alone. I reached my car and sat inside without even turning on the engine. My hands were shaking. I stared at the steering wheel, but my mind was blank. I didn't cry because the shock was too heavy. It felt like the whole world had gone silent. I kept replaying that moment. The anger in his voice, the way everyone agreed without saying a single word, the way they watched me walk out like I was nothing. As I sat there, trying to breathe, something caught my eye. Across the street, a dark SUV was parked with its lights off. I wouldn't have noticed it normally, but the way it was positioned made it look like it had been waiting there. The windows were tinted, but I could see a shadowy figure inside. They weren't looking at me, they were watching the house I had just been thrown out of. A cold chill ran through my body. I didn't know who the person was, but something about the stillness of that SUV made my stomach twist. I kept looking at it, hoping it would drive away, but it didn't. It just sat there quiet and unmoving. Then my phone buzzed. I jumped because the sound was so sudden in the silent car. My first thought was that it was my father, maybe finally feeling some guilt. But when I looked at the screen, the number wasn't saved in my contacts. It was completely unknown. The message was short, only 5 words, but they hit me like a slap. They're liquidating the trust. The papers were a fraud. For a second, I didn't even understand what I was reading. I stared at the message, confused, and then everything clicked at once. The papers Roland tried to force on me. His anger when I refused. The cold attitude from everyone inside. The SUV watching the house. It all started falling into place. The numbness I felt began to fade. Something else took its place, something sharper and clearer. It felt like waking up after being asleep for too long. My grandmother's voice rose in my memory, gentle but firm. The same words she used to tell me when life got hard. When the wolves show their teeth, my dear, you must become the hunter. I had brushed off those words before, thinking they were just a poetic warning. But now, sitting alone in my car, abandoned by my own family, and holding a message from someone who clearly knew more than I did, her words settled deep into my chest. I wiped my face with my sleeve, took a slow breath, and lifted my head. If they wanted me gone, fine. But I wasn't done. I drove through the dark roads without knowing exactly where I was going. The night was quiet, but inside my mind, everything was loud. I kept thinking about what had just happened, and without meaning to, my thoughts went back to my childhood. It was like every memory I had pushed aside for years suddenly came back one after another. I remembered Jax's 16th birthday. He walked outside and found a brand new car waiting for him in the driveway. Everyone cheered and hugged him, celebrating like he had achieved something great. I stood there smiling for him, even though I knew I would be taking the bus the next morning like always. No one bought me anything for my birthdays except small things that were quickly forgotten. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. But now, driving alone in the night, it felt different. It felt like the first sign that I had never been treated the same. Then I remembered the day I found out my college fund was gone. My father said he had to borrow it to put Jax in a private school because your brother needs better opportunities. I was told to understand, to be mature, to not make it a problem. I ended up taking student loans and working after classes just to stay enrolled. Jax never even thanked me. He never even looked guilty. He acted like it was perfectly normal that everything always went his way. Another memory came back, one I had pushed deep down. I was working 2 jobs, running on almost no sleep, because my father's business had fallen into debt. He told me it was my responsibility to help the family. I handed over almost everything I earned. And while I was rushing from job to job, Daphne was showing off a brand new diamond bracelet to her friends, saying, "Roland always spoils me." I never questioned it. I thought helping the family was the right thing to do. I didn't realize I was the only one giving while everyone else took. As I drove, the road ahead was empty, but my mind was full. Every memory showed the same pattern. Every time I sacrificed something, they expected more. Every time I achieved something, they made it sound small. When Jax got a C on a test, they blamed the teacher. When I got an A, they said, "Well, of course you did." I worked hard for everything, but it never seemed to matter. That was when the truth hit me in a way it never had before. I was never treated like a daughter in that house. I wasn't loved for who I was. I was useful. I was someone they relied on, someone they pushed responsibilities onto, someone they expected to fix their problems. They saw Jax as the golden child. And they saw me as the tool they could use whenever they wanted. Driving through the night, I finally understood something painful but clear. I had spent my whole life being second best to people who never deserved to be first. I kept driving until the city lights slowly appeared in the distance. I didn't know exactly where I was heading at first, but something inside me pushed me toward a memory I had almost forgotten. Years ago, my grandmother placed a small locket in my hand. Inside it were tiny engraved numbers, coordinates. She told me, "One day these will matter." At the time, I didn't understand, but now that everything had fallen apart, those numbers felt important. I opened the locket again, reading the coordinates under the soft glow of my car's dashboard. I typed them into my GPS. The route led to a quiet part of a nearby city, far from crowded streets and noise. I followed the path, unsure but trusting my gut. When I finally arrived, I found a small, secluded building with a simple sign outside, an old law firm. It didn't look busy or modern, but it felt intentional, like it existed for a specific purpose. I parked the car and walked up to the door. Before I could knock, it opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out, looking calm, as if he had been expecting me. "Ilara Vance?" he asked. I nodded. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling and guided me inside without asking any questions about why I was there. It felt strange, but also strangely comforting. Inside, the office was quiet, filled with shelves of documents and old files. He motioned for me to sit, then placed a thick folder on the desk. My heart raced. He said he had been waiting for the day I would come, and that my grandmother had prepared everything long before she passed away. Hearing her name brought a tight feeling to my chest, but I listened carefully. Mr. Sterling explained that my grandmother, Astrid, had been far more successful than anyone knew. She had built a massive estate through careful and brilliant investments. She trusted almost no one with this information, especially not Roland. He said she loved me deeply and feared that my father would try to take everything from me once she was gone. So she planned in secret. He opened the folder and showed me her true will. My hands trembled when I realized what I was reading. Every part of her estate, properties, accounts, investments, was left to me. Not shared, not divided, not controlled by anyone else. And then he revealed the part that almost felt unreal. The mansion called Seacliff Oasis. A $20 million cliffside home she had designed as a gift for me, hoping I would one day have a life filled with peace, not struggle. He also showed me copies of the documents from the dinner. Fake papers created to trick me into signing away my rights. My father's rage suddenly made sense. They hadn't invited me to dinner for family reasons. They wanted control, and I had ruined their plan by refusing to sign. As I sat there, absorbing everything, a strange calm washed over me. The confusion, the fear, the pain from earlier, it all shifted into something firmer, something stronger. My grandmother had trusted me with everything, and she had also warned me without using many words. Now I finally understood why. The sky was slowly turning pale when Mr. Sterling and I reached the edge of the cliff. The air was cool, and the sound of waves crashing below echoed through the quiet morning. As we pulled up to the gates, they opened smoothly, almost like the place already knew I was coming. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the mansion, Seacliff Oasis. Even from the outside, it didn't look like anything I had ever seen. It was tall and modern, made of glass and steel, shining softly in the early light. Walking toward it, I felt a strange mix of disbelief and calm. This place didn't feel like something meant for me. It felt too big, too beautiful, too peaceful. But at the same time, something inside me told me I belonged here, like this was the first place in my life that was truly mine. Mr. Sterling unlocked the door and stepped aside so I could enter first. When I pushed it open, the view took my breath away. The entire front of the mansion opened to a wide living area with floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the glass, the ocean stretched out forever, waves moving like slow blue paint strokes. The sunlight touched everything gently. White walls, smooth floors, carefully placed furniture. It was quiet but not empty. It felt alive with intention. I walked through the room slowly, touching the smooth railings, running my fingers along the cool glass, taking in every detail. Everywhere I looked, I could see my grandmother's care. The house wasn't just expensive, it was thoughtful. It was built for comfort, for peace, for someone she wanted to protect. I felt a sting in my eyes because this was the kind of safety I had never known growing up. The contrast hit me suddenly. Just hours earlier, I had been standing in a house where yelling, judgment, and coldness were normal. The walls there had always felt tight around me, like they weren't meant for me no matter how hard I tried to fit in. But here everything felt open. Every room felt like a quiet promise that my life didn't have to be small anymore. Mr. Sterling placed a folder on the counter in the main hall. Inside were the final documents that officially transferred everything to my name. I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than it should have, almost like it carried the weight of my past along with it. I hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then I signed. It didn't feel like just a signature. It felt like closing one door and opening another one so wide that the world on the other side almost blinded me. The moment the pen left the paper, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to what others did to me. I wasn't being pushed, used, or controlled. The estate was mine. The future was mine. And for the first time, I was truly in control. I started going through every file and message with Mr. Sterling sitting beside me, guiding me gently but firmly. As we dug deeper, the truth began to show itself piece by piece, like a dirty thread slowly being pulled from a cloth. I realized Roland was not the confident man he always pretended to be. His company was falling apart, and he was desperate. He had planned everything from the start, using my grandmother's estate to save himself. I felt my chest tighten as I saw the documents proving how close he was to losing everything. It hurt even more when I found out Daphne and Jax were involved too. I had trusted them in small ways, believing they were at least neutral, but their messages told a different story. They were hungry for money, ready to support any plan that promised them a share. I kept asking myself how people could smile at me while plotting behind my back. But the hardest blow came when I saw Celeste's name. My aunt, the woman who claimed to care for me, who let me sleep on her couch for one night after I was thrown out. She had been paid to stay quiet. Roland had promised her a huge amount of money once everything was transferred to him. She had known the whole time what he planned to do to me. She had sat at that dinner table, watched me break, and said nothing. It was all part of the setup. I felt something inside me crack. Not the kind that breaks you completely, but the kind that makes you stand up straighter. I kept reading, each discovery making the air around me feel heavier. They had practiced lines, planned reactions, even timed the moment Roland would tell me to leave. The dinner wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a performance, rehearsed and polished, just to push me out so they could take everything. As I looked at the evidence in front of me, I felt myself getting quieter, calmer. Not weak, steady. Their lies were no longer shadows. They were right there, exposed under the bright light of truth. Every screenshot, every memo, every recorded call Mr. Sterling uncovered made the picture clearer. They had all betrayed me for money, and they had done it without guilt. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I thought of my grandmother. She had trusted me with her legacy, not them. She must have known something I didn't. And now, finally, I understood. I was not the weak one in this story. They were. When I opened my eyes again, I felt different. Their web of lies wasn't holding me anymore. It was falling apart. And I was watching every strand snap, one by one. Roland started calling early in the morning, long before the sun was fully up. At first, his voice messages were sharp and full of anger, demanding to know where I was and why I wasn't answering. He acted like he still had power over me, like I was supposed to run back the moment he snapped his fingers. I listened to a few of them, not because I cared, but because I wanted to understand the tone of a man who thought he had won. By noon, the anger in his messages had faded. His voice became softer, almost shaky. He said things like, "We can talk, and this is all just a misunderstanding." I knew it wasn't. He didn't want me back. He wanted control back. He wanted access to what he thought he could steal. His shift from rage to fake kindness only showed how desperate he really was. I didn't reply to a single message. I didn't need to. While he kept calling, I stayed focused. With Mr. Sterling guiding me, I began moving my grandmother's assets safely into the accounts she had set aside for me. Everything was done quietly, cleanly, with no room for Roland to interfere. For the first time, I understood the weight of what I had inherited. Not just money, but the ability to protect myself. I had always been good with numbers, good at managing details, and now those skills were finally working for me instead of someone else. Each transfer I signed was like closing another door in Roland's face. He didn't know it yet, but the money he was counting on was slipping away from him. I made sure third parties he trusted delivered the message clearly. The estate was no longer something he could touch. His financial plan, the one he had built on lies and greed, had collapsed before he even realized it was happening. The more I secured, the harder Roland tried to reach me. His calls came every hour. His messages became longer. He begged, then blamed, then begged again. I stayed silent. I didn't need to argue or explain. My actions were speaking for me. I could almost picture him pacing around, pulling at his hair, trying to figure out how everything had turned against him so quickly. He had always seen himself as the one in control, the one hunting for opportunities, the one setting traps. But now the roles were changing. I wasn't the helpless one anymore. I wasn't the one being pushed out of my home, confused and scared. I was the one watching him lose everything he tried to take. And he didn't even know how much more was coming. I heard the sound of a car engine approaching, and when I looked through the gates of Seacliff Oasis, I saw them, Roland, Daphne, and Jax, pulling up in a black SUV. They got out quickly, all of them looking angry and demanding. Roland's face was red, Daphne's lips pressed tight, and Jax had that same arrogant smirk, though it seemed forced. They started yelling, insisting I let them in. I didn't move. I stayed by the gate, calm, steady, and completely in control. "Open the gates," Roland shouted. "This is my property too." I shook my head and took a deep breath. I could see the surprise flash across their faces when I didn't panic. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't begging. I didn't have to be. I began speaking slowly and clearly, explaining everything I had learned. I told them about the forged documents Roland had tried to force me to sign. I mentioned Daphne and Jax's part in the plan to gain access to my grandmother's estate. I told them about the bribe my Aunt Celeste had accepted to stay silent during the dinner. I described Roland's failing business and how he had planned to use my inheritance to save himself. Every word was deliberate, every fact precise. I watched their faces closely as I spoke. First came shock, like they couldn't believe I knew so much. Then fear, when they realized that I had not only discovered the truth but acted on it. Finally rage, as they saw that the person they had thought of as weak and powerless was now the one holding all the control. Their shouting quieted down, replaced by stunned silence, broken only by the occasional muttered complaint or angry hiss. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I didn't make threats. I let the truth do all the work. Each piece of information I shared felt like a weight landing squarely on their shoulders, making them see themselves exactly as they were: greedy, deceitful, and exposed. Roland's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't touch me. Daphne's eyes filled with panic, and she took a step back, realizing there was nothing she could do. Jax's arrogant expression faltered completely, and for the first time, I saw fear in him. I finished calmly, looking each of them in the eye. "You thought I was weak. You thought I could be pushed out, ignored, or fooled. You were wrong. Every move you made, I saw it and I acted. This house, this estate, and every bit of it is mine. And you have no claim, no power, no control." I stayed still, silent, letting my words sink in. I watched as the family I had once trusted crumbled under the truth. They had tried to hunt me, but now the roles were reversed. The person they underestimated had won, and they could do nothing to change it. After the confrontation, I didn't feel the need to shout or punish them. I didn't need revenge. I simply closed the gates and walked back inside. That was the end of them in my life: Roland, Daphne, Jax, and even Celeste. I had nothing more to say, no more energy to give. Their time of control, manipulation, and lies was over. I was done. With the estate fully in my name, I focused on something bigger than myself. I set up a charitable foundation in my grandmother's name. It was meant to help people who had been treated unfairly, used, or betrayed, just like I had been. Every detail of the foundation felt right, organized, strong, and full of purpose. It wasn't just a way to honor my grandmother. It was a way to make sure her generosity continued to change lives. I spent days planning, speaking with experts, and ensuring everything was ready. The work filled me in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. Every person helped, every life touched, reminded me that I didn't need to focus on the past to find strength. I had everything I needed now: security, independence, and a future that was truly mine. One morning, I stepped out onto the balcony of Seacliff Oasis. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, waves sparkling under the sunlight. The breeze was cool, carrying the smell of salt and freedom. I let myself breathe fully for the first time in years. I realized something important. Everything they had tried to take from me, every insult, every moment of being pushed aside, had led me here. They yelled, "Get out!" at the person they thought I was weak and powerless. In doing so, they had awakened the woman my grandmother always knew I could become. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt peace, a quiet, strong satisfaction that came from knowing I had claimed my life on my own terms. Everything I had worked for, every challenge I had endured, had been worth it. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. I looked out at the ocean again, the waves endless and steady, and I smiled. This was my life now, built on truth, courage, and purpose. I didn't need them, and I didn't want them. I had reclaimed myself completely. Everything they tried to destroy had only made me stronger, wiser, and ready to live the life I was always meant to have. Do you think Alara made the right choice by cutting her family out completely, or should she have given them another chance? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out.